Hello and welcome to InFocus. I am G. Sampath. It is a public secret that torture is institutionalized in Indian policing. This is not my personal sentiment, it is the view, or rather, the conclusion expressed by a new report on police torture and unaccountability, un as in within brackets, put out by a couple of NGOs. This report is by Common Cause and Lokniti Center for the Study of Developing Societies, titled Status of Policing in India Report 2025 Police Torture and Unaccountability. This report, for the first time, provides empirical data on the justifications for torture that permeates the Indian police. And what is unique about this report is that it is not only about presenting the views on torture from the perspective of human rights activists or from the perspective of citizens and vulnerable populations. It presents the perspective on torture which is sort of imbibed by the perpetrators themselves, in this case, the police. I don't want to bombard you with data and numbers in terms of the various statistics which this report sort of provides, but broadly, the survey comes to the following points, which I think many of us have intuitively known as well. Number one, it says that the police rely on a culture of fear through the use of quote unquote tough methods. But it's not clearly defined what those tough methods encompass, but that is the term the report uses. Secondly, it says the police justify torture and consider its use acceptable in all kinds of cases, including minor offences and not just national security or terrorism related cases. Thirdly, support for torture and disregard for established procedures is high in the highest echelons of the police, especially the IPS officers. And fourthly, it says that the respondents in this survey, the policemen who were surveyed, have a preference for bypassing legal procedures in favor of violent policing methods. These are all very troubling kinds of findings that the survey has brought out. But believe it or not, the Constitution of India prohibits torture in police custody. So, how then do we get the custodians of the law to respect the law when it comes to torture? Joining us today is a former police chief who has been a leading figure in advocating for police reforms in India. Mr. Prakash Singh, welcome to the pod. Mr. Singh, to start with, one of the things I found sort of troubling while reading through this Common Cause report is that the higher ranks, the better educated, better qualified IPS officers, according to this report, were the most vociferous defenders of torture. Have you noticed that in your career? Does it match with your experience? And what are your thoughts on this particular sort of data point of this report?
See, firstly, about the report itself. The report has, I will not question the empirical data because that is based on a survey of, they talked about more than 8,000 policemen across states and union territories. So it's based on field studies. I will not question the data, but in writing the report, a glass is, say, 70% full and 25% empty. Everywhere they have talked about the empty portion, 25%. That so many percentage people justify torture in serious cases. They have not talked about the people who do not justify. For example, I'll give you one simple example where they say that they have said at one place that in case of dangerous criminals, now they have said that 25% of the people believe that it is better that they are killed rather than subjected to illegal trial. But the fact of the matter that 74% of the people have also said that no matter how dangerous a criminal is, the police should try to catch them and try to follow the proper legal procedure. So, in a number of cases, I have seen that the report has highlighted the percentage of people who are justifying the wrong thing, but the larger percentage of people who are against it, that is not highlighted. It is written, of course, but in a subdued tone. The highlight is on people who have justified the wrong methods. For example, there's another paragraph which says that more than 70% of the people, they justify, they are in favor of human rights. 79% of the people support human rights. 71% support prevention of torture, and 79% support evidence based interrogation techniques. So, I mean, this is the brighter side of the picture, which has not been sufficiently highlighted in the report. And I think that is where, while the facts are true, but the projection is such, it becomes alarming, it becomes disturbing. The situation is, I'm not contesting that. But to what extent, and compared to other democracies, other countries, where do we stand? I think that also needs to be understood. So, I mean, we have to take a holistic view. I mean, they take an overall view of the picture. And let me tell you about. There has been so much has been said about torture. Let me give you one experience of mine. I was asked to conduct an inquiry into the Jat reservation agitation in Haryana in 2016. I completed the inquiry within 75 days, covering 8 districts, visiting hundreds scenes of crime, recording statements of 2,000 witnesses, and talking to and addressing about something like 300 gusted officers in in different districts. And one thing which came out very sharply during the inquiry, that in in all the districts that I visited, officers talked about hesitation in the use of force. Hesitation in the use of force. And I would like to highlight this. And when I said why this hesitation, then they quoted the instance of there was a particular incident in the past where SPSR, his life was threatened, he used force and he killed the other person. For that, he was suspended, and I mean, with all the unpleasant consequences which follow. So, since then, the general impression in the force in the whole of Haryana is that if you use force, there is no guarantee, even if it's legitimate use of force in the lawfulest discharge of your duty, there's no guarantee that you will be defended by the government. So this is a very stark conclusion. I mean, they were not sure. So even when the Reuters ran amok, and as Tribune commented rather graphically, they said even if the Lashkar-e-Toiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed had been given a free run of Haryana, they would not have inflicted so much economic damage as the Jats inflicted on their own state. Something like 20,000 crores. That was the assessment. There were instances where a crowd would approach the police station, not approach, I mean, sort of come to attack the police station, and the police station staff, instead of defending themselves and protecting the armory and the malkhana and all the rest that is there, they went over to the rooftop and allowed them to ransack the armory, loot the weapons, loot the malkhana, and get away with it. So there is tremendous hesitation in the use of force, and this general impression, I do not know about the IPS officers
But sir,
and the.
is that a kind of a general trend? Can we generalize from this? Because we know that Jats. I mean, the police does not treat all communities the same way. That is sort of fairly well established. Even in Manipur, we saw that police or whatever were nowhere to be seen when the armories were ransacked. I mean, the report also has given empirical data to the effect that there are certain populations, certain communities, Dalits, Adivasis, women, migrant workers, landless laborers. These are the kinds of people who are at the receiving end of police high-handedness. I mean, can you sort of reasonably imagine Adivasis or migrant laborers or Dalits, having the same kind of impact or treatment from the police as the Jats did? I mean,
No,
that's
but
not really
I'm
likely to
talking in
happen.
terms of casualties. Police
Yeah.
are very hesitant to use force, which will lead to casualties, because there is a general feeling that they may not be defended by the government, and government, just to placate say, a particular group or avoid any controversy or avoid an uncomfortable situation in the legislature or the parliament, they prefer to victimize the police officers and they use such and
So
suspend them.
even on this question of casualties, sir, this the report mentions NCRB data from 2011 to 2022, 1,107 deaths in police custody. Not a single police officer convicted for any of
Yes,
this.
yes.
So that's a data point
And
which sort of seems to.
that is amazing. But the point is, what happened to the judicial inquiries? What were their findings, and what happened to the trial? Why? I mean, is the fault does the fault lie with the police, or does it lie with the criminal justice system, which did not take cognizance of the incident and ensure a proper judicial inquiry followed by punishment of the guilty police officers? There is something seriously wrong. I mean, there are major incidents I remember where guilty police officers have managed to get away, but the problem is they manage to get away because they get political protection. And the politician is never hauled up for that. I'll give you one instance. When I was at the start of my career, I was superintendent of police in Jhansi, and there was a state minister for home. I remember his name, but it may not be proper to disclose it on mic. He was going state minister for home, going around from district to district, and apart from other things, one of the items on his in his agenda was prepare a list of people who ought to be bumped off. And before leaving, he would also always say कि अगली बार जब मैं आऊंगा तो मैं देखूंगा इस लिस्ट में कितने आदमी आपने ठिकाने लगा दिए. No, this is the state minister for home. Not that I followed his instructions. Fortunately, he never came also, so there was no problem. But there were people who were prepared to oblige. See, there are a number of cases where the politicians say, ये मामला भाई देखो 3 दिन में कप्तान साहब इसको सॉल्व करो, डीजी साहब ये 3 दिन में सॉल्व करो. Now there is no magic wand to solve a problem within 3 days. And then what would happen? The alleged rapists are caught and shot dead. So what contributes to this kind of situation, that also needs to be understood. Political pressure, then failure of the criminal justice to deliver. I mean, when cases drag on for 20 years, 30 years, what do you expect? I mean,
So,
take the case of 84 riots. The matter is still dragging, and one of the villains is still roaming around.
right. So I buy your point completely about political pressure and political patronage of select officers, and those things are all part of the problem. Which, of course, I mean, as someone who has been deeply invested in police reforms, I mean, you're very familiar with all these complicated issues. But specific to torture, I mean, there is no political pressure that makes you go resort to torture in the case of a petty theft.
Right.
Right? Police resort to torture for
I
petty
agree.
theft.
I agree. I agree. Now, here, what I would like to say, let us first define torture. Now, why even the National Human Rights Commission has not defined torture? We have endorsed the UN Convention on Torture, but we have not ratified it. For ratification, you need a law against torture, and then you can ratify it. We have neither passed a law. Passing a law would have meant defining torture. Now, in the absence of a definition, let us go by the UN definition. They say severe pain or suffering being inflicted, that is torture. It may be mental, it may be physical. Severe pain or suffering. Now, what is the severe pain and suffering? That needs to be defined.
Why, sir? It's pretty obvious what is severe pain
No,
and suffering. Why do you need to define
no,
it?
no. It's
Severe
better
pain.
that you define it. Otherwise,
No, but severe pain is the definition of torture. Why do you need to define severe pain? If you beat someone or if you pull their nails, fingernails, is
no,
there any doubt that it
so
is torture?
let government of India say that severe pain or suffering amounts to torture. Let them say so.
But we don't
But
have a law.
we don't have a law, we don't have a definition. And this report, while it's a brilliant report, but it commits a terrible mistake in the sense that it uses terms like torture, uh, tough methods, third degree, as if they are interchangeable. It's not clear. I mean, when they say that tough methods
But
will
third
be.
degree is just like it's like a lingo used to refer to
No, but
torture,
let us
right? I mean,
look. When you're dealing with legal matters, you need to be very clear about what will come in the domain of torture and what will be permissible use of force against a criminal. And please remember, a police station is not a restaurant. It is not a place of entertainment. It's not a picnic spot. It's a place where criminals of all shades, some hardened criminals, now Tawar Rana has come. You see the
so,
kind of
but sir, do you agree that even most hardened criminal enjoys the protections of the constitution inside the police station? Would you agree with that?
protection of the constitution, yes, but not to the but some methods will have to be used to put pressure on him.
Yeah, but those
No,
methods have to be within
short of
the.
torture. Short of torture. That's why I say torture must be defined. Short of torture, some tough methods will have to be used. If you are going to feed them biryani and entertain them with music,
So,
and if you expect them to disclose all the secrets and tell why this happened or why Bombay terrorist attack happened, then I think you are living in a sorry but fool's paradise. I mean that kind of situation will not work. When in your police station, when you're dealing with hardened criminals, when you're dealing with terrorists, when you're dealing with communal snakes, when you're dealing with separatist elements, when you're dealing with insurgent elements, some toughness is absolutely unavoidable. Some toughness is absolutely unavoidable. That will have to be used, but it must be short of torture as defined by the UN Convention.
You're saying there is a problem in definition of torture. Now I understand why you find that this definition is very important, because you want to be able to sort of adopt tough methods that don't fall into the domain of torture, and therefore the definition of torture is important.
Is important.
Okay, so do you think that the reason, according to, I'm going by this report, which is the document we have for today's discussion, do you think that the reason in Indian police stations these tough methods often sort of uh, slip into the domain of torture, because nobody knows what torture is or whatever? There is this is because there is also a support for torture in Indian society as such. There is this sense, as you said, when you put it nicely, saying there are hardened criminals, you need tough methods, but is there a sense that there is uh, torture is a necessary evil, which we need to sort of live with if we want to have law and order and safety and ensure security and so on?
No, I
Do you
won't.
think Indian
No, no,
society sort of
no,
condones torture as well? Is
no. I
that
won't. I won't use the word torture. Torture, I will say, is indefensible under any circumstances. Torture of the kind we hear about, like somebody's fingernails being taken out.
like what is so that is clearly torture by whatever however we define it?
Right.
Okay, what would be an example of a tough method that is not torture? Like, is there an example that might come to your mind as an ex-policeman?
I mean,
Like,
I think that is. Let us leave it to understanding of the people rather than defining it.
no,
It's
no, not define it. It's just an example. I don't understand, because to me, anything which affects a person's dignity, for instance, as defined in the Constitution, freedom and liberty, right? If you're going to curtail it against whatever has been granted to you as a fundamental right or your human rights, that would be against the law. It may not be torture, but you might be breaking the law. Like, for instance, one of the instance of police high-handedness. High-handedness defined as violating the lawful procedure. You arrest somebody and then you don't give an arrest memo. So there is no record of this person being detained, and since there is no record, it sort of frees you up to treat that person in whatever way you want, including torture. That is what the report says. I am not saying this. Now, this kind of a thing, it may not be torture, but it would still fall into the domain of a tough method. Just picking someone up, taking them to an undisclosed location, not giving that person access to a lawyer, not informing their family where they have been taken. None of this is torture, but it's still deviance from the accepted lawful process of investigation or whatever. So would that fall into the domain of tough method but not torture? Is that acceptable in certain circumstances, would you say?
No, it will be difficult to. I think unless we first agree on a definition of torture, and then we'll have to accept that with certain category of criminals, a certain level of toughness would be required. But the kind of bias or prejudice in the treatment of Dalits, Adivasis, and Muslims as listed in this report, that is inexcusable. I'm very clear about it. Just because a person has no political clout, just because the person has he can't contact somebody influential and say कि साहब मैं यहाँ फंस गया हूँ, just that doesn't mean that you give him the rough end of the stick. And if somebody from a money family is there, then you will entertain him with tea and give him all the resources, right? So that attitude I do not condone. That attitude I'm not justifying. Uh, having said that, I think uh, Having said that, I think we need to appreciate that the human side of the police and compare the practices in other parts of the world. Talking about the human side of the police, I mean, people say all sorts of things about the police. Police in India is callous and high-handed and cruel and um, lacks integrity, etc. The human side of the police was beautifully brought out during COVID, and I would like to dwell on it for 1 or 2 minutes. You see, during COVID, when everybody went into a cocoon and justified the conditions of COVID for not performing their normal duties, the only two agencies of government which are fully functional, were the medical department and the police department. Medical department had to, but what was the compulsion on the police to go out of its way to relieve the distress of the people? There was no compulsion. There was no superior orders. There was no political direction. And yet the average policeman went out of his duty beyond his charter to perform functions which nobody had asked him to. Getting essential commodities for people, arranging for oxygen cylinders, helping people in distress under various conditions. And this has been brought out by this very common cause. You read one of their other reports on status of policing, I think it is 2021. They have said normally police is the visible face of the government. But during COVID, police became the most visible face of the government. And uh, they were performing all kinds of functions which are not laid down in their charter, just to help the people whom they found in distress. The BBC, which is always critical of India and more so of the Indian police, they say Indian police's popularity skyrocketed during that period. They have said this, and there was one poll strat, I think. They said Indian police popularity went up to 67% during that period. Now the point is, during COVID, there was no political direction, there was no superior official direction, and yet the common policeman behaved in a very humane manner. So the policeman is essentially humane. I feel proud of police performance during the COVID. Policeman is essentially humane, given the right environment, given an emergency, he rises to the occasion, and you see his human side. But the point is, the way you are using him, misusing him, abusing him, day in and day out. Have you ever talked of human right of the policeman? Have you ever talked of that? A few years back, Times of India had a news item saying that in Delhi, policemen are living in slum-like conditions. I still have that cutting with me. Now, if in Delhi they are living in slum-like conditions, what would be the condition in, say, in the remote villages of UP and Bihar? Have you insist that he should be on 24 hours on duty? Do you think he's a robot? How can any human being be 24 hours on duty? Why have we never thought of giving him an 8-hour shift? Why have we never thought of giving him a holiday on Dashera, Diwali, Holi? He has no holiday. He's 24 hours on duty, and then you expect him to behave like a Superman. He should respond to every situation and not only perform his own duty. See, today a situation has come where almost all the other departments look for police help in carrying out their lawful functions. Excise department goes for a raid. वो कहते हैं भैया पुलिस लगा दो वरना हम पिट जाएंगे. Income tax department goes for a raid. They say we must have police to support us. You go for a demolition, there must be police. So police is, I mean, there are all kinds of demands on police, and you just cannot function. The different departments cannot function without the police. So that is the kind of situation you have placed us in. And on top of that, you said no, there are 500,000 vacancies in the police, but we are not going to fill that up because we need that money for populist schemes. Not that governments don't have the money, but they will use that budgeted money for populist schemes which will give them votes, which will enable them to distribute freebies. पर पुलिस के लिए पैसा नहीं है उनके पास. पुलिस के घर बनाने के लिए पैसा नहीं, पुलिस के ज़रूरतों के लिए पैसा नहीं, पर ये सब के लिए पैसा है. So you have exploited the police. You have exploited the police. And what have you done to reform the colonial police? Please tell me. What have you done so far? 7 decades have gone. Is it not a matter of shame that the colonial police is still there? What have you done to reform the police? Who has raised his voice for police reforms? The Supreme Court, yes, upheld the cause of police reforms. They gave 7 directions. Which state has cared to comply with all of them? There's a halting, grudging, half-hearted implementation of those directions. So, I mean, it's all easy to blame the police, but nobody will talk of human rights of the police, and nobody will talk of the constraints under which police functions. You will subject him to political pressure, you will subject him to all kinds of pressures, and then expect the police to do, I mean,
Right.
catch the moon for you.
Right. No, thank you for that sort of a more wholesome or a holistic picture of the conditions under which the police in India operate. I mean, I appreciate you painting the human side of the police, the constraints, the tough conditions they are working under, the pressures, and also the fact that they are sort of there are multiple demands on them, which is not really possible for a human being in a police uniform to always stand up and deliver. But the bottom line, I mean, I would like to insist, is having taken into account everything that you've said, including the great services to citizens during COVID, all of that, and the extreme tough conditions under which they've been working 24 hours duty, all of that taken into account still doesn't condone torture in police custody, however we may define torture.
I will not condone torture. I will not condone custodial death. I will not condone custodial rape. All these cases must be dealt with very strongly, very sternly, ruthlessly, and you have to punish them. If you are not able to punish them, there is something is missing somewhere. Not at the end, not with the police, probably with the criminal justice system. What has the report said about the magistrates? They're silent spectators, not bothered.
The
Than
doctors, magistrates, and lawyers is what. Yeah.
doctors when
What is the magistrate's job
when,
here, sir? According to what should they
I
be
mean,
doing?
when a man comes to you, you should ask him. पुलिस ने आपको ठीक से बेल के लिए आता है, किसी के लिए आता है, तो आपकी आपकी पिटाई तो नहीं हुई, कुछ हुआ इस तरह नहीं हुआ, मतलब he
Is
should
it
talk.
written anywhere that the magistrate should do it, or you expect that they should do
No,
it?
no, it is written also. It is expected
Okay.
also.
Okay, so the magistrate should inquire whether the person has been
Magistrate
tortured.
should take a more positive role when a man is brought to him for bail. When he is produced before him कि भाई तुम्हारी पिटाई तो नहीं हुई, तुम ठीक से तो हो, वगैरह वगैरह, कुछ कुछ नहीं. He becomes a silent spectator, and the doctor who is asked to do examination of an alleged victim of torture, he may be an eye specialist, I mean, as the report brings out. Now, what will the eye specialist do in that kind of situation, or what will a person who administered anesthesia, what will he do? But this is I mean, there is general sort of indifference to torture victims by the Indian society as a whole. By the lawyers, by the magistrates, police is of course in
So
the dock.
where is the lawyer sort of lacking? And you pointed out the lacuna with regard to the doctors and to the magistrates. What are the lawyers not doing in this context?
Lawyers, I think they are more, the less said about them, the better.
Okay. Uh, I won't oppress
and
you.
and even the NHRC has been criticized in this report. I mean, they have not
The
kept.
NHRC, the report says NHRC has not been releasing data or the details about.
Not,
Uh,
and it faults them for what it calls colored vision of the victims of torture.
yes, color vision. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
that they have said so.
Yeah.
So I mean, even everybody is at fault, and but why pick up only the police? I mean, the whole system needs an overhaul and a
Yeah,
corrective
I
measures.
guess the reason they pick up the police because that is the venue for torture, and they are the
No,
perpetrators at the
police
back.
is the easiest to blame, and police because it is a disciplined force, it does not react, it does not defend itself, and it does not say that you are wrong on this. Therefore, police is always in the talk. Others people can cry, they can shout, they can raise objections, but police is a disciplined force, so they just keep quiet.
Right. I mean, one of the data points in the report which has sort of stuck in my brain is that every year 1.3 million Indians are subject to torture. They're victims of torture. And that's a big number. And there is no data of how many
I
of
don't know
those have had
on what basis they have 1.3 million. Is it there in the
million instances of torture. Yeah. Yeah, it's there in the report. Yeah. Yeah,
Okay,
1.3
even
million.
if it is there, I do not know on what basis, but even if it is true, uh, would you also take cognizance of the fact that about 1,000 policemen die in the performance of their duties every year, and this figure, even if you combine all the countries of the world, leave aside India, even then it will not come to that figure.
Right.
Why does it happen?
Right. We'll come to that, sir. But I want to sort of focus on the torture-related issues because that is the theme of this discussion. Now, I mean, I wanted to ask you this particular question. You know, when somebody who is good in mathematics might join a graduate course in mathematics and become a great mathematician. So you have people coming and joining the police force. I'm assuming none of them have any experience or training in torture. I'm assuming police training schools don't teach them how to torture. So how does a young policeman who joins the force, how does he get initiated into something which is so, extreme and it's so horrible? So how do they learn these torture techniques? I mean, doesn't they initially face any kind of aversion to this kind of a practice? In your experience, how do you think this happens? How does somebody get into
You
this
see,
work?
every institution has a culture. Every institution has a culture, and the colonial culture of third degree methods, treating a culprit harshly, beating him up, and extra legal methods. We have inherited that from the British, and it is unfortunately continuing. And when you see around this, I mean, that has probably an infectious influence, and the man probably is made to feel that this is the only way to go around things. But things are changing very fast. I tell you, and I would disagree with some of the findings, although I have not done any research, but I know the pulse of the people, and I think the majority of the IPS officers today say कि सब हम लोग ऐसा काम क्यों करें जिसमें सरकार कल को हमें लटका देती है और सरकार हमें डिफेंड नहीं करती है. Whenever if there is a change in government or even in the present government, why should we do such things? there is a very strong feeling among IPS officers of the present generation now. Why should we do things for which we may be held accountable at a later date, with either under the present government or with the change of government? And then there's nobody to defend you. Your whole career is ruined. And people are generally reluctant to use methods which are unlawful, which would be questioned in a court of law, and which are considered inhuman. So, I mean, IPS officers, the new generation, they're different and they're thinking differently. And government is also thinking differently. They have made it mandatory that in all cases where punishment is 7 years or more, forensic examination is a must. So, government is, and while it is all very easy to talk of scientific aids to investigation, the point is what aids are available at the police station. If you visit a police station, I mean, when we visited a police station,
Evidence-based interrogation is suggested as an alternative to torture and forcing confessions.
every time I visited a police station, there used to be a box meant for scientific aids to investigation, and the only thing it contained was how to take footprint or fingerprint. That's all, and that also the powder may have gone dry or the brush may have lost its bristles. So. And there was no other equipment, and forensic laboratories are so inadequate in the country. You see, the crime in India, there's a publication by VPRNT. They used to publish figures of the total number of exhibits lying unexamined at forensic laboratories. And but now they have stopped giving those figures because those figures were inconvenient. I find wherever figures are inconvenient and which sort of activists make use of, government is not publishing those figures. So the last time I read that figure, it was I think 1.5 lakh exhibits lying in forensic laboratories across the country, untested, unexamined. What is the figure today? I don't know. But of course, I must give credit to the government that now more forensic laboratories are coming up at a very fast rate. But you see, setting up a building is one thing. Setting up a forensic laboratory is very different. Setting up a building, getting all the equipment, getting the technical know-how, which would be able to test them as per the prescribed procedure, it takes time. Forensic, it will take at least 7 to 10 years for these forensic laboratories to become fully functional and be able to discharge what they are expected to. So forensic laboratory and these things will change. You see, earlier nobody paid attention to scientific aids to investigation, but now forensic tests being made mandatory. And more forensic laboratories coming up. I think methods are changing, and there will be less reliance on third degree methods or stuff methods or torture methods to get relevant information out of people.
See,
And
one of the myths that the report sort of corrects is that, I mean, there is this belief that torture is only resorted to when they need to force someone to give some evidence or to confess or whatever, or in the course of an investigation. But there is ample evidence that many policemen actually they've said so. They believe that they resort to torture not only for getting information, but also because they feel that the legal system or the criminal justice system, as you said, they don't seem to have enough faith that justice will be served, so it is up to them to quote unquote dispense justice. So they also resort to torture as a kind of a punishment of the person who they think is a hardened criminal. So that is one of the reasons also for the resort of excessive violence and torture. So did you find this sentiment, that it's up to us to dispense justice, even when you were serving in the force, for instance? Like, is this like a widespread sentiment among the
it's
police?
not a widespread sentiment, but it does happen here and there. Here and there, for example, when there was terrorist movement in Punjab, I was serving there. The police knew that these are terrorists, and they knew that everything else had collapsed. If you read the newspapers of those days, articles by Shekhar Gupta or Vipul Mudgal and others, it clearly says that the one and the only institution which was functioning in Punjab when terrorism was at stake was the police department. Everything else had collapsed. So they said the judges would be threatened inside the courts. That kind of scenario was prevailing there. So it was only for the police to dispense justice. So whatever terrorists were there, they said, "Well, we just dispense, we just deal with them in the manner that they
Right,
deserve."
right. Terrorism, national security, it's a different box. Let's leave that aside. Now, one of the data points of this empirical study says that police have also been found to be using torture in cases of petty crime, and I give you examples of petty crime
Petty
listed:
crimes, it's
loitering, causing public nuisance. So these are crimes for which torture has been resorted to. So how does the
No,
police justify beating? Beating
no.
is very common, so we all know it happens.
Mhm.
So there is no political pressure to solve loitering as a crime, okay? And still beatings happen. Beatings, I'm assuming,
No,
constitutes torture.
such
So
instances have
how does
happened.
that?
No, that is totally unjustifiable. It's Thoothukudi, what happened? I mean, they were only
Yeah,
violating the curfew orders.
curfew order.
Only
Yes,
curfew orders. That was their only crime. For
yes.
which they could have been all right. Given some punishment or maybe some fine or whatever it was, and be done with it, or maybe let off after a stern warning. But instead of that, they were given such a thrashing that they both died, both father and son died. So these such instances are absolutely indefensible. They have to be tried as they have to be tried for murder and dealt with accordingly. I mean, I have no doubts about that.
But do you think they need to be police need to be trained to not resort to these things? There is a mindset change, training that they need.
Training has to improve. Police training has to improve. But actually, I would say, howsoever you train a person, I think the culture of the society he comes from, the culture which he brings into the police, and his own genes. I mean, they somehow have a very overpowering effect. But still, training can dilute that. Training can refine that. Training could probably make him a better person. So training definitely needs improvement. And unfortunately, police training institutes in India are in a state of neglect. I mean, you look at the army training institutions. It is
But police
considered.
training institutes, you mean the ones where IPS officers go, or you mean where
No, I
the
mean the police
constables,
training colleges where police training college and the RTCs and the STCs, where constabularies,
constabularies? Okay,
constabulary sub inspectors,
okay.
there the training is a neglected area, and
But by neglected, what do you mean? Do you mean that
neglected
they're not
means
staffed with
no
enough people?
in terms of infrastructure. If you go, you'll find buildings were still what they were, say, 50 years back. If you go to the staff, they were the discarded people from the districts whom nobody wanted. So इसको training में भेज दो अपना पढ़ाएगा क्या पढ़ाएगा? He's himself demotivated. He is not going to.
Yeah.
Uh,
So training posting is a punishment posting or
Training
something
is
like that.
considered a punishment
Punishment.
posting. Yes,
So
this
you
is
get
what
like a
must.
quality
It's a
you
punishment
get.
posting.
Okay.
In army, it's a prize posting. They consider it a matter of honor to be posted to a training institution. In police, it is a punishment posting. All the bad eggs are thrown there, and they have no motivation to impart any kind of idealism to the police officers or men. So training is a neglected area that needs to be reformed, and I have said this in several of my communications to Home Ministry that after the Gora Committee, so much of water has flown down the dirty Yamuna. The whole training structure needs to be given a fresh look, and the government needs to do something serious about it.
One last question before we wrap up. Now, India is a signatory to the UN Convention against torture, but we still don't have a domestic law that criminalizes torture and also criminalizes all forms of extrajudicial harm. Let's put it that way. So how important is it to have a separate anti-torture law, and what, according to you, would be the basic features of such a law? Because now we know that the Constitution doesn't allow torture, but it's not enough to prosecute people who commit torture because we don't have a law that criminalizes torture explicitly. So, is it really a necessity to have this law first before we can really do something about sort of eliminating this practice? And if so, what are the basic features that a law should have? Maybe two, three
You
basic
see,
things.
we need to have a law against torture, and we can draw from the UN Convention. Uh, the way they
There
have
was
defined
2010.
torture.
There was a bill which came out which was so bad. I think nobody wanted to really talk about it. I think, right? 2010. There was a bill which was
I don't remember having
yeah,
seen
yeah,
that. I
yeah. There
don't,
was an
but
anti-torture.
we must have a law against torture. Torture must be defined, and it must be conveyed to all and sundry, especially the policemen, that torture is not permissible, and that for inflicting torture you would be liable to criminal prosecution. That must be. And having done that, then the next step would be to ratify the UN Convention on torture. I think that needs to be done to humanize the police, and the police needs to be humanized. I mean, but let me tell you, in spite of, I mean, I admit that there is torture. I admit that there is high-handedness, but we are a far better police than U.S. police. They're a far better police than Russian police, far better than Chinese police, and of course, better and thousand times better than the Pakistan police. I mean, these are countries where people are sent to a gulag, they are sent to a concentration camp, they just disappear and nobody hears about them. India, the security forces are very humane compared to that. And we are, I would say, after the British police, perhaps British police, in any case, doesn't have much experience. But in counterinsurgency, I would say we are probably the best trained armed police forces in the world. US has no patience for counterinsurgency. They say shock and awe, just destroy thing. Here we select, choose. Try to distinguish between the friend and the foe, and we try to take care that the innocent are not killed. Security forces in India are far more humane than the forces elsewhere in the world. On that note, I would like to conclude without contesting that there are things which need improvement at the lower levels in terms of treatment of prisoners, in terms of people who are brought into custody. Those things need improvement, and above all, these things will improve when government also shows a commitment to this kind of reform and insulates police from pernicious political influences which are there almost every day.
Right. Thank you so much, sir. I mean, the two basic points. I mean, we conclude with one, of course, that the country should pass an anti-torture law. India should ratify the UN Convention Against Torture. And regarding the third point, which you made, that the Indian police is the most humane, there will multiple points of view on that. People may not, or everybody may not agree with that view, but that's your view. We respect that. Thank you so much once again for coming to the Hindu office and
They will
sharing
agree
your
with me
views.
once they are sent to Pakistan for 20 days.
Well, thank you so much. A pleasure talking to you, sir. Thank you.